Hi, everybody. It's Pastor Brent again, and I thought I would just want to share some thoughts with you today from Second Corinthians chapter 4. Now, in Second Corinthians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul is talking about how he gives the analogy of that when we become new believers, we're new creations in Christ, and that the light of the gospel begins to shine forth in our lives. And so when he's talking about that, in verse 7, he says, "We now have this light shining in our hearts, but we ourselves are like fragile clay jars containing this great treasure. This makes it clear that our great power is from God and not from ourselves." The analogy that Paul is using is like that whatever radiates out from us, that light that comes out from us as we interact with people around us, that light is from God. And that light is the gospel. And that as we share good news, sometimes we share it with our words, sometimes we share it with our deeds and how we care for people and how we love on people and how we just sometimes are just friendly to people. But that light that's in us shines out from us. I don't know if you ever had it, but when I was working in the marketplace there, and sometimes I would come across a person and I would just say, I think that person's a Christian just because of how they reacted and how they were responding to me and to other people around them. You'd say, there's something about that person that shows that I think that they're a Christian. And then maybe in a follow-up conversation, you'd say, yes, they in fact were believers. And you say, okay, God gives us that sense of that we can sometimes sense His presence in people around us that we may not really know otherwise. But that sense, it's not because of that person, it's because of what's going on in their heart. It's that God is living in each and every one of us that know Him and believe on Him. And because of that, His light shines forth out of us. And an illustration is that, if he uses what we're in fragile clay jars, or that because sometimes we would say we're cracked pots. And in order for light to come out, if the light were just in a sealed container, there would be no light coming out from that container. So we are in cracked pots, that we're not perfect people, but through those imperfections, God's love and light can still shine out in us. As we look around us and we sometimes self-evaluate, we say, oh man, I really am not that great in this area, or I've failed in this area. That authenticity, that realness, that ability to say, yeah, I'm not perfect, sometimes is a more attractive thing to people who don't know Jesus than if we put on a facade that says, oh, okay, I've got everything put together. My life is all perfect. I have no problems. And just because I know Jesus, everything is good in my life. Because in the reality of things, that isn't true. And people who look from the outside and look at that say they're just being hypocrites. So when our humanity comes through in our lives and we go through difficult things, and it's how we do that is when we trust in God, and we fail and we mess up. But when we mess up, we go back and we say, hey, you know what? I'm sorry. I can think of some of the times when I was a pastor in Rapplejay, where maybe my interactions with some of the community members were perceived not to be so great. And when that happened, it was usually a perception issue, but I would go back to that person and I would talk with them and apologize for if I had hurt their feelings or done something that offended them. And in doing that, that was way more powerful in admitting my weakness and that I might have blown it. That was a powerful witness to those folks who then saw me as a real person who isn't perfect, who can, yep, I make mistakes but when I do make those mistakes, God still works through me and allows me to go back and ask for forgiveness, because that's what we as believers should do. When we make a mistake, we go and we ask whoever we've offended to try and make it right with them and apologize. And God uses that to actually be more powerful by showing through our cracks in our clay jars, that sometimes He can use that more powerfully than when we're just trying to put on that everything is perfect, and if we don't admit that when we're wrong. So as we interact with each other and as we interact with people, we realize, okay, we are real people, we make mistakes, and we need to let God's love show through us even through those mistakes. There's a fable that's taught that there were two jars that were used for hauling water, and the one jar was perfect and it held water perfectly, and the other jar had kind of some cracks in it. And the person that was hauling the water would always haul the cracked jar in his right hand and the good jar in his left hand. And he would go and he would gather the water and he would haul the water back to the village where he was going to be using the water. And he did this day after day. And the cracked pot was saying, "Man, I'm always leaking stuff out here, and it's just not working. I'm not really being what I should be. Look at that perfect pot over there. He never spills. He never has anything happening." So one day he was said to the guy who was hauling him, "You know what? I'm really sorry. I've been leaking. I haven't been doing my job. I haven't been getting the water all the way back to the village like you've wanted me to." And then the person who was hauling the water says to the jar, "Yes, but let's go back, look at the path that we've been walking on." And they went back and looked at the path, and along the one side, the right side, where the crack pot was always hauled, were all kinds of flowers and grasses, and all kinds of life was growing there because the pot had leaked out the water into the path, and it was actually producing a great harvest of beautiful things. Paul is saying that in this letter, that, you know what? Yep, we're crackpots. We don't do things perfectly, but God uses us anyway. And it's not because of us, it's because of what God does for us and through us that changes are made in the world, that other lives are affected by us because he works in us in spite of our imperfections. And I don't know about you, but that gives me great comfort because I blow it sometimes and I don't always do it right. But I know that even through that, God can use those things, and he uses even us as cracked pots to be as strong influences in his kingdom. I know lots of people. They're not perfect. In fact, some of them are kind of rough around the edges, but even those people who are rough around the edges, if they love Jesus, they can influence people around them in ways that the perfect person may not be able to influence because they aren't seen as real. Be real, be who you are, be who God created you to be, and in doing that, you will actually be fulfilling your purpose that God has for you, because God works through us, his light shines out of us and through us, and because we're crackpots, we can have an influence in his world. So relish in the fact that we're not perfect, but God uses us anyway, and we can take great comfort in that. Have a great week. We'll talk to you again.